The Navy SEAL sniper team had already fired 132 shots, and not a single one had touched the target. Yet within minutes, a quiet woman in a faded maintenance uniform would step onto the range and do something that would be talked about across the base for years. She would hit 3 targets with a single bullet. The morning sun hung low over the rugged hills of Silver Ridge Training Facility, a remote desert range carved between jagged rock formations nearly 100 miles from Las Vegas, where elite Navy SEAL marksmen were completing the final qualification required before deployment overseas. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross, a veteran sniper with nearly 15 years in special operations, slammed his spotting scope onto the wooden bench with visible frustration as another shot cracked across the valley and missed its mark by several feet. "Unbelievable," he muttered, running a hand over his closely shaved head. "That's number 132. Around him, 5 other SEAL snipers adjusted scopes, checked their ballistic computers, and stared through high-powered optics worth more than most civilian cars, all trying to understand why a stationary steel plate sitting 600 yards away might as well have been invisible. Petty Officer Ryan Cole studied the tablet strapped to his forearm, where a ballistic calculator displayed perfect firing solutions based on wind speed, air density, barometric pressure, and even the Earth's rotation. "Everything checks out," Cole insisted, his voice tight with disbelief. Wind 12 miles per hour northwest, temperature 78 degrees, humidity low. The numbers are dead on. Lieutenant Carlos Vega, acting spotter for the morning exercise, slowly lowered his binoculars. "Then why are we missing by 4 feet every time?" Another rifle thundered. Another miss. The steel plate downrange remained untouched, its dull gray surface gleaming in the desert sun like it was mocking them. Cross felt the pressure building. This was the final sniper qualification before their scheduled deployment to Eastern Europe, and failure meant replacement by another unit. Navy SEAL teams weren't supposed to fail simple long-range engagements. Yet here they were, an hour into the exercise, and none of the best shooters in their platoon could land a hit. "Again," Cross ordered sharply. Cole chambered another round, steadied his breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing through the canyon walls. Through Vega's spotting scope, the bullet's vapor trail streaked across the valley, then passed harmlessly several yards to the right of the target. Vega exhaled slowly. "Mississippi." Cross turned away, jaw clenched. Behind the safety barrier, about 20 yards from the firing line, a woman in a faded maintenance uniform knelt beside a stack of metal target markers. She looked completely ordinary, the kind of person no one noticed on a busy military base. Her name tag read M. Carter, and she was busy collecting discarded range flags while holding a dented thermos in her other hand. She had been quietly working there for the last half hour, apparently cleaning up equipment from earlier training groups. But as the SEAL team argued over wind calculations and ballistic data, her eyes occasionally drifted toward the distant target across the valley. She watched the flags, the grass on the slopes, the shimmer of heat rising from the desert floor. Another rifle shot echoed across the canyon. Another miss. The woman paused in her work. For several seconds, she simply observed the environment, the direction of the wind flags, the flickering mirage patterns above the rocks, the way dust drifted in a slow arc across the hillside halfway downrange. Then she stood up and walked a few steps closer to the barrier, separating maintenance personnel from the firing line. "Excuse me," she said quietly. No one heard her at first. The SEALs were too busy debating whether their ballistic software was malfunctioning. "Excuse me," she repeated, slightly louder. Chief Cross turned around with obvious irritation. "Ma'am, this is an active training range. Civilians need to stay behind the barrier." The woman nodded politely. "Of course," she said. "I just thought you might want to know that your wind flags are lying to you." The statement hung in the air like a dropped grenade. Every SEAL on the firing line turned toward her. Cole blinked. "Our wind flags." The woman pointed calmly toward the distant hillside. "Surface wind is moving northwest," she explained. "But about 800 yards out there's a thermal layer flowing in the opposite direction. Your bullets pass straight through it." Silence fell across the firing line. Vega slowly lifted his binoculars and focused on the area she indicated. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed the grass bending slightly toward the shooters rather than away from them. "Hold on," he murmured. "She might be onto something." Cross frowned deeply, stepping closer to the barrier. "Ma'am," he said in a tight voice, We've got ballistic computers and wind sensors tracking every variable on this range. The woman shrugged lightly. Computers measure surface data, she replied. But bullets travel through 3 dimensions. Cole stared at her. You're saying there's a crosswind layer we didn't account for? She nodded toward the shimmering air above the rocks. Watch the mirage pattern, she said. Vega adjusted his scope again. This time he saw it clearly. Heat waves drifting sideways across the valley in a direction that didn't match the wind flags at all. Holy, he stopped himself. Gunny, she's right. Cross felt a flicker of irritation mixed with something else he didn't want to admit. Curiosity. Ma'am, he said slowly. How exactly would a maintenance worker know about mid-range thermal layers affecting long-distance ballistics? The woman took a sip from her thermos and studied the distant targets. Her expression was calm, almost amused. I've seen a lot of ranges, she said. Cole crossed his arms skeptically. Even if you're right about the wind, he said, that target's still 1,600 yards away. Nobody here has managed to hit it all morning. The woman looked back at them, and something in her eyes suddenly seemed different, focused, calculating, almost dangerous. That's because you're fighting the wind, she said quietly. You're supposed to work with it. Cross exhaled sharply. All right, ma'am. If you're such an expert, maybe you'd like to show us how it's done. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she glanced downrange again at the 3 steel plates positioned across the valley, one at 1,600 yards, another farther back at nearly 1,800, and a third barely visible near the far ridge. When she looked back at the SEAL team, a faint smile appeared on her face. What if, she said calmly, I told you I could hit all 3 of them with one shot? The snipers stared at her in stunned silence as the desert wind swept quietly across the range, and none of them realized that the quiet maintenance worker standing behind the barrier was about to reveal a level of skill that would change everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. At dawn, the training range at Port Alder Naval Base was silent except for the distant crash of waves and the metallic clink of rifles being set on bipods. The elite snipers of the Maritime Special Operations Unit had gathered for what was supposed to be a simple final test: hit a single distant target in heavy wind conditions. Yet for nearly an hour, the most decorated marksmen in the unit had failed. Gusts twisted across the valley, bending bullet paths just enough to throw every shot off by inches. Captain Marcus Hale studied the targets through binoculars, frustration tightening his jaw as another round struck dirt just beside the steel plate. These were the best snipers in the command, men who had operated in deserts, mountains, and open seas, but the unpredictable crosswinds made the shot nearly impossible. The exercise was meant to demonstrate control under pressure, yet it had turned into a slow embarrassment. When Lieutenant Maya Serrano finally stepped forward again, most of the team expected the same result. She had already shocked them earlier by hitting 3 targets with a single perfectly calculated shot, threading the bullet through aligned plates at different distances. Now the instructors wanted her to repeat something similar under even harsher conditions. The wind was stronger than before, the targets smaller, and the pressure heavier because every eye on the range was fixed on her. Some of the veterans crossed their arms skeptically. Others watched quietly, curious whether her earlier success had been luck or something more. Maya ignored the murmurs and settled behind her rifle, the polished barrel reflecting the pale morning light. She adjusted the scope with slow, precise movements, measuring the distance between the 3 metal plates that had been placed at slightly different angles downrange. The wind flags snapped sharply, their direction changing every few seconds. Most shooters would wait for a perfect moment of calm, but Maya did something different. She studied the pattern instead of fighting it. In her mind, she calculated how the gust would push the bullet, how the first plate might redirect the round, and how the final trajectory would carry the shot to the farthest target. Captain Hale watched through the spotting scope, unsure whether to feel intrigued or worried. The last time she attempted this kind of shot, the alignment had been perfect. Today, it was deliberately imperfect. One mistake would send the round ricocheting into empty dirt. Yet Maya looked completely calm, as if the chaos of the wind only sharpened her focus. She inhaled slowly, letting the noise of the range fade into the background. Around her, the other snipers shifted in the gravel, waiting. Some whispered that no one could replicate the earlier shot under these conditions. Others wondered if the young lieutenant even realized how risky the attempt was. Maya exhaled halfway, paused, and squeezed the trigger with the steady pressure that every sniper is trained to master. The rifle cracked across the valley, the sound echoing against the cliffs. Through the scope, Hale followed the bullet's path. First impact, a sharp metallic ping as the round struck the nearest plate. For a split second the range seemed to freeze. Then came a second clang, louder than the first, as the deflected bullet struck the middle target. A third ring followed almost immediately after, the farthest plate shuddering on its mount. 3 hits. 1 shot. For a moment no one spoke. The wind continued whipping through the valley, but the range itself felt completely still. The snipers stared downrange in disbelief, their earlier skepticism replaced with stunned silence. Captain Hale lowered the binoculars slowly, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The plates were swaying violently, proof that the shot had been real. Maya lifted her head from the rifle and calmly removed her ear protection, as if the moment were routine. A few of the veterans began walking toward the targets to confirm the hits, their boots crunching over gravel. When they reached the plates, they found the bullet marks exactly where the impacts should have been. 1 entry point, then 2 angled strikes where the round had ricocheted perfectly into the next targets. Word spread quickly across the range. The snipers who had missed earlier now gathered around, studying the marks and quietly acknowledging that something extraordinary had happened. Captain Hale finally approached Maya, shaking his head with a faint smile that mixed pride with disbelief. "I've seen thousands of shots in my career," he admitted, "but nothing like that." Maya simply shrugged and began clearing her rifle. To her, the moment wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about understanding the environment better than anyone else. The wind, the angles, the distances, they were all pieces of a puzzle. As the morning sun rose higher over Port Alder, the instructors realized that the demonstration had turned into something far bigger than a training exercise. The story of the impossible shot was already spreading through the base, and before long, it would travel far beyond the quiet valley, where 3 steel plates still swayed gently in the wind. By midday, the story of the shot had spread across Port Alder Naval Base faster than any official report ever could. Mechanics in the motor pool, sailors at the docks, and instructors in the command building were all repeating the same unbelievable detail. One sniper had managed to hit 3 targets with a single bullet, not once but twice. When the range officers finished examining the targets, the evidence removed any remaining doubt. The metal plates showed the unmistakable pattern. The first strike dead center, the second at a sharp angle where the round had redirected, and the final impact on the farthest target nearly 600 meters away. Captain Marcus Hale gathered the unit together before dismissing the exercise, his voice carrying across the range with a mix of pride and reflection. He explained that the test had never really been about perfect shooting conditions. It had been about adaptability, the ability to understand the environment and make decisions that others might overlook. Many of the experienced snipers nodded quietly, realizing that while they had been fighting the wind all morning, Lieutenant Maya Serrano had been studying it. Instead of waiting for the conditions to cooperate, she had used them as part of the shot itself. Hale turned to Maya for a moment, giving her a respectful nod that said more than a formal commendation ever could. She simply smiled slightly and slung her rifle over her shoulder, already preparing to leave the range like any other day of training. For her, the attention didn't matter nearly as much as the lesson behind the moment. Precision wasn't only about steady hands or perfect aim. It was about patience, observation, and the willingness to think differently when everyone else believed something couldn't be done. As the team packed up their equipment and the wind continued sweeping across the valley, one thing was clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Sometimes the most extraordinary shot isn't the one that hits a target, but the one that proves the impossible was only a matter of perspective.